afternoon. Thank you for spending time with us today for our second installment of Live with LifeLink. I'm Tracy Add, Public Affairs Project Manager for LifeLink Foundation, and I'm so excited to spend this time with you today. April's Donate Life Month, and April Donate Life Month is a time for all Americans to celebrate the generosity of those who have saved lives by becoming organ, eye, and tissue donors, and encourage more Americans to follow their example by registering their donation decision. Our team at LifeLink has been so busy preparing for this month. We're excited it's here, and we're looking forward to a great month of activities. You can also visit our website to learn how you can get involved in this special month. We look forward to having you in all of our activities. In addition, this week is Donate Life Blue and Green Spirit Week. Each day we are celebrating with fun activities, and you can learn how to get involved on our social media platforms. Today's Spirit Week celebration is Write a Message of Hope, and it's perfect for our panel discussion today called Connecting Families. So let's get started by introducing our guest. Dina joined LifeLink of Georgia in June of 2020 as the Family Services Liaison and is honored to witness the connection between donor families and their loved ones' recipients. She assists families in a variety of capacities after the donation has taken place and helps to address any questions or concerns. Prior to joining LifeLink, Dina was the director of bereavement camp in a hospice organization, was also employed with a funeral home that provided grief education and support to individuals in the community. Welcome, Dina. We're excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everyone. And I wanted to let you know before we get started, I'm in my office, as you can tell, in the building, and I have a timed light, so it will go off and get dark in here. So if you see me get up and turn it back on, that's what I'm doing. I wanted to mention that.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dina. Our next panelist is Lydia. Lydia started her career at LifeLink in April of 2012, working in the Hospital Services Department of LifeLink's Tissue Bank. She began her current role as Donor Family Service Liaison at LifeLink of Florida in January of 2017, where her favorite part of her job is putting donor families and recipients in direct contact with each other. Lydia is originally from Des Moines, Iowa, and moved to Tampa, Florida in 2003 and has a background in DoD contracting. She enjoys spending time with her husband and her two twin daughters, and you can usually find them at Disney World or at the beach. Oh, that sounds fun. Welcome, Lydia. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tracy.
Absolutely. So this is our panel for today. It's going to be Lydia, Dina, and myself, and we're going to be talking about all things donor family communication. So we're excited to have you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're getting people on. You're commenting. It's great to see you there. So let's start it off with supporting donor families does not end with us when organ and tissue donation is complete. We continue to contact and connect with our donor families for quite some time after donation to help guide them in their journey as they've moved forward without a loved one. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. So we're going to start with Dina and let Dina share some things of how we communicate with our families after donation takes place. Dina?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Yeah, so Lydia and I support our families in a variety of ways post-donation, and we're going to both share different ways that we do this. And I will start with our mailings. And I'll mention a couple of them. We send mailings to our families for up to 1 year after the donation. And a couple of the items that we send a sympathy card, and we also send an anniversary card. And in the sympathy card, we also include some information for families to create a tribute for their loved one. And it's actually called our virtual memory book, because you can go to a page on LifeLink's website where you can actually create a tribute. And families do that by uploading a picture, and then they can share thoughts and words about their loved one, just whatever they want to share. And once they post that, it is a public site, so everyone can see the site, and you can invite your family and friends to look at the tribute. And it's just a great way to honor your loved one and to go on there and remember who they were and what they meant to so many other people. And then, of course, we end with an anniversary card, because it's just the 1 year anniversary for families can just be a tough time, and we just want our families to know that we are thinking of them in just a difficult time of the year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dina, for that. Lydia, you're going to share some of the other things we have going on.
Yes. So like Dina mentioned, we have several mailings throughout the year. One of those mailings is a survey that we send to our donor families. And in that survey, we include a brochure on how to submit a quilt square. We have a graphic for this. This is our brochure that we send. It includes information on sizing, what materials work best, and some ideas on what to include and where to even start. We get a lot of phone calls that people are like, I don't even know where to start. What do I do? What do I use? So this brochure helps in that. It's also supposed to help in the healing process, creating this quilt square in honor of your loved one. Once the family completes that, they'll send it to Dina and I, and it will then be added to our next quilt and hang on display in our offices. And prior to the pandemic, the quilts also traveled to events throughout the year to share the message of organ and tissue donation with the public. So that's our quilt square project, our quilt memorial quilt project is what we call that.
Awesome. We got a few pictures of a completed quilt, so we'll look at those and see the completed quilts we have. These are all from the Florida area, but it's beautiful.
So
I love
those
our
are all
quilt.
individually sent to us, and we have a quilter that puts these beautiful quilts together.
And it's always so special because each one is different. Each one is unique to the donor, and getting to see all those squares and when they're all put together, it's just really, really neat to see. So I know someone mentioned they want to do that for their daughter. Please submit one. We would love to have that for our next quilt. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Dina, let's talk about some of the events that we do.
Yeah. So we do a couple of typically in-person events outside of COVID. But we have what we call a Tree of Life donor wall, and you can see the picture on the screen now. So this is just another way we honor our loved ones and their families. We have a wall in each of our buildings that has the names of our donors from the previous year. So for 2021, we would have the 2020 names, and then in 2020, we had the 2019 names. So we do this every year. And we have an open house for our families to come to the building, and we have a specific day and time frame that they can come in. It's a very casual setting. People come in, and a lot of times families will take pictures at the wall. We also have several of the quilts displayed that Lydia and Tracy were just talking about. And families will sometimes bring their quilt squares in. They drop them off at this event for us to put in our next quilt. And other times families will see this quilt and they'll think, wow, what a great idea. I want to also submit my quilt for them to include in the quilt coming up. So yeah, it's just a great day. And also families will have a chance to volunteer, sign up to volunteer within LifeLink for areas that would be a good fit for them. So that's one of our events. Lydia's going to talk about the other one.
Yes, and we have a slide for our Day of Gratitude event. There is one of our pictures. Kind of like Dina was talking, we have initiative tables at this event as well. And this is our quilt table. That's Bernie, a heart recipient. He and his wife are there. And then there's 3 LifeLink staff members in the back. They were answering questions on how to submit a quilt square, everything I just talked about, the specifications, what to do, what not to do. And then obviously there's quilts on display for people to get ideas. And then on the left, on the white sheet, that is what we were pinning up quilt squares that people were actually bringing that day. So like Dina said, for both of our in-person events, people can bring their quilt square to the event and we'll put it on display right away. And once we have enough, we put it into a quilt. But that's just one aspect of the Day of Gratitude. But it was an annual event prior to the pandemic. It's a family-friendly event where we invited donor families to gather together to honor those who gave the gift of life through organ and tissue donation. The event included a short program where we had guest speakers, including a donor family and recipient, as well as a video tribute where we invited donor families to submit a picture of their loved one to share in the beautiful video. And then, like I said, there were tables set up that day about the Quilt Initiative table and how to become a LifeLink volunteer. We had our public affairs department was there, as well as some other volunteers to answer questions on if becoming a LifeLink volunteer was a good fit for you. You can volunteer at in-person events like this. You can be a speaker for us. You can do office work. There's many different aspects to being a volunteer. Unfortunately, right now, due to COVID, we're not having any in-person events, but we still would love to have you as a volunteer. Also at the Day of Gratitude, a picnic lunch was served, and there was plenty of time to connect with other families who share the experience of the loss of a loved one. And it was a beautiful and touching day for all.
I love our events. I love our in-person events. And I know we're all sad we haven't been able to do them because of the pandemic. We hope to get back to those soon. But we're still able to connect with our families virtually. We've done a few things the past year for that. So we're still connecting, even though we're not physically with each other right now. So I think that's really great. So thank y'all for what you do for that. Is there some more things we've got that we connect with our families and support them after donation?
Yeah, so Lydia and I both get several phone calls and emails from our families wanting to know how the recipients of their loved ones are doing, understandably. It's certainly a connection to them and their loved one. And we don't have this information in our records. So we have to reach out to the transplant centers many times to get this information. And we do get a lot of phone calls from family members who did not authorize the donation. So we have to get verbal consent from the legal next of kin to be able to give this information. That is not typically an issue, but I just wanted to share that with you just so families will understand. And most families do understand, because it just protects everyone involved. And that's why we do that. But it is very meaningful for our families to know how the recipients are getting along. So I'm always happy to share some good reports.
Absolutely.
Yes, and one of the last things we do is we connect families through correspondence, which is the main reason we're here today, to help explain the process of written communication and how donor families and recipients can be put in direct contact or possibly meet someday. Many people want that. And that's my favorite part of what I do here at LifeLink. And Dina and I are going to explain the process and answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. That's all great stuff. I love that we are able to share what we do after donation, because some people think maybe that might be it, that we don't continue to support these families. And the truth is we continue to support even for years down the road. Our families become part of LifeLink. They are our LifeLink donor families, and we still connect with them. And I love that we're able to share that with our viewers. So thank you for doing that. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between organ donation and tissue donation communication. We know there's a difference. Let's let our viewers know what that difference is. So Dina, let's start with you and see if you can kind of help us out with that difference of communication.
Okay. So the key distinction between the organ and tissue donor communication is that we are able to identify the donor family and the transplant center of where there was a recipient that received the organ or organs. And then the transplant center can also identify the donor family. That makes for an easy transition of sending the correspondence to the family and to the recipient. That's really the key difference in the organ and tissue donor communication. I'm going to let Lydia share some aspects of the tissue communication.
Great.
Right. So the main difference, like Dina said, is the organ. We know who the organ donor is. We know where they were transplanted. So that's, we can send the communication there. With tissue donation, in many instances, that tissue recipient information is completely confidential. So when the tissue leaves LifeLink and goes to the hospital or transplant center, we don't know anything about that tissue recipient unless they write to the donor family first. So if they write to the donor family first and we forward that communication on to the donor family, then obviously we have their information now and the donor family can write back. However, in every case is different, and there are certain types of tissues where we can, the donor family can write first, such as corneas. But obviously every donor is different. Every donor is able to donate different things. So the best way to find out if a tissue donor family would be able to reach out to their tissue recipients first would be to contact Dina and I. We would be able to find out with what tissues were donated and if we're able to reach out first, or if we would have to wait for a tissue recipient to reach out first.
Awesome. And I like what you said, Lydia, that every case is a little bit different. So we do have we can't say it's all this way for everybody. We have to look at each case by case. So if you do have questions, we're going to have our contact information come up on the screen, and we'll pop that up a couple of times during the presentation today, so you can write that down if you want it. So the phone number is going across the bottom of your screen now for Florida and Georgia. So y'all write that down, call them if you have a question, and they'll work with you on each individual case. So
Yeah,
thank you,
I'm
ladies.
happy to help.
Yeah, that's a lot that we need to make sure people know the difference. So thank you for that. So let's talk about how we communicate between donor families and recipients. So LifeLink facilitates this communication. And a lot of times it helps grieving families heal, and that allows the recipients the opportunity to express their gratitude for the gift that they received. So there are quite a few moving parts to communication. So I want us to spend a bulk of our time today talking about the roads of communication and exploring the different components to communicating amongst donor families and recipients. So we're going to start out by showing some actual visual roads of communication. So we're going to throw up an image for you guys, and Dina's going to talk a little bit about how we go about this process of the road to communicating. So Dina, starting with you.
Yeah, so we thought that the visual would help understand, and I know many of you who have already corresponded have probably understand and been explaining the process. The correspondence has to go through several different hands, but it works, trust me. So if the donor family initiates the correspondence, they actually send their correspondence to Lydia and I at our LifeLink offices. Then we forward to the transplant center. Then I think the next slide will show, I'm sorry. So we forward it to the transplant center, and then they forward it to the actual recipient. So we don't send it directly to the recipient, I guess is what I'm trying to help y'all understand. So it takes some time for it to go through several hands. And this is just to make sure sometimes the recipient, for whatever reason, may not want correspondence. So the transplant center would already have this information, and they would be able to communicate that back to us so we can let the family know. Then if the recipient initiates the correspondence, it's kind of backwards. So the recipient would send it to the center. Then the center knows to send it to either Lydia or I. And then we receive the correspondence, and then we are able to identify the donor family, and it's sent to the donor family. And again, it's not sent from the center directly to the family because for whatever reason, the family may not want correspondence, and the center would not know that. So it protects privacy. And it does sound like it's kind of making things hard, but it works. We get a lot of correspondence, so the process works. But it's helpful for you to know how many hands it does have to go through to get to the right person.
Exactly, Dina. I think that's so important for a visual. That's why we wanted to throw that visual up there so y'all can actually see it doesn't just kind of hop from here to there. It's got different parts that it has to go through. So thank you for talking about that. So let's talk about how do we start corresponding? Like we're talking about corresponding, we're talking about donor families and recipients. So what does that actually mean? So how do we start that? Is it a phone call, an email, a letter? Dina, let's talk about that. What do we need to do first?
Yeah, so we actually start that correspondence with a family or a recipient via mail. And you can do that through letters or cards. Some families choose to write their letters, handwrite their letters on notebook paper, computer paper, whatever they want to do to get their letter to us. Some people will type it on the computer and mail it to us that way. Some people will even send the letter in an attachment, and we print it off and we send it to the transplant center. Some people choose to just go get a card that shares words that you may have written, and then they write a little note in the card. So there's no rule on how you want to create your correspondence. It just has to begin with mail. And we will talk about later in this hour about emails and phone calls and why that is not the way to go in the beginning.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's talk a bit about privacy and confidentiality. So we know the process of donation is confidential. The donor family does not know the recipients. Recipients do not know the donor family. So Lydia, let's talk about how do they initiate that communication but continue to be protected by that privacy? So is there a way to do that? How do we go about that?
Yes, like Dina was saying, we want to ensure that all parties are protected. So we do have brochures for that we send to all donor families and that the transplant centers give to their recipients. And in those brochures, there's information on what can be included, what shouldn't be included. And some of that information would include that you can include would be the state you live in, first names, your family information such as children, grandchildren, spouse, some of your hobbies and interests, either yours or the donors. And recipients obviously may want to include some important milestones. They want to let their donor family know how they're doing. Obviously thank the donor family and their donor. And if you do put a last name or an email address or a phone number, which we don't want to share that, but if you do put that, Dina and I will just white it out. So if you ever receive a letter from a donor family, if you're a recipient or a recipient send something to a donor family and something is whited out, that probably just means they put a last name or an email address or phone number. So we're going to go ahead and take that out for the time being. And then we can talk about that. I think that's coming up, that we're going to talk about how we can put families in direct contact. But if you do put anything that technically shouldn't be shared early on, it's okay. We'll take that out and forward the letter or card on without a last name or phone number type thing.
That's a perfect segue into our next little topic of people, donor families and recipients. I've been here at LifeLink now for 14 years, and they're always concerned about, what do I say? So recipients, some of them have the guilt because they're living, someone else has passed away and they were the beneficiary of that. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They think thank you might not be enough. And you've got some, on the other side, donor families, they don't know how to start a conversation with someone who has a gift from their loved one. So that's a perfect segue of what you were saying, is just put information in there and y'all can white it out if it's not appropriate. So I think we need to make sure people don't get so hung up on the, what shouldn't I say, that they don't write a letter or a message of hope, but they can put stuff in there. So Dina, let's talk about, what do we want them to include? What should be a starting point for someone who wants to write a message of hope to their recipient or donor family?
Yeah, so I like what you just said about something about families or recipients not writing a letter just because they don't know what to say. You know, if you, I will say, if you are feeling like you want to write a letter, whether you're a recipient or the donor family, then something's telling you that you probably want to write the letter, and let's work together to figure it out and help you do this. So because Liddy and I see a lot of letters come through our hands to send to the centers or the families. And I've seen so many recipient letters that start out their letter by saying, I didn't know what to write. I really don't know what to say. So first thing, just be honest, share your heart and really what you're feeling. If you don't really want to write a letter and you just want people to know that you're thinking about them, like I said earlier on our correspondences, get a card. And you could even, if you're the donor family, you could, to the recipient, you could even get a card that would be worse that you would like to share. And you could even write in there, I hope you're recovering well from your surgery and thinking of you. If you're a recipient and you just want to say thank you to that family, get a nice thank you card and write in there, I'm so sorry for your loss. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. It's difficult. It's really, really hard, I know, for recipients. Some of the recipients, and I may be jumping ahead and I apologize, some of the recipients may be experiencing survivor's guilt. The families have experienced sudden traumatic passing of their loved one. The emotions are in different places. So my point is, if you are struggling with what to say, don't stress out about that. Share your heart, write something short. If you're still struggling, give us a call and we will help you work through that.
I love that. So you guys are available to help. So our family service liaisons, they want to help you. If you want to write, if you have that feeling that you need to say thank you, or you want to reach out to your recipients, give us a call. Let us help you through that process. This is what these ladies do on a daily basis. They want to be there. Phone numbers on the bottom of the screen. Please reach out to them. They are here to help you do this communication because we want you to connect if you want to. So thank you for that. Great information. So the road to communication.
Can I add to that too?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
So the only thing I wanted to add is that like Dina said, a lot of recipients don't write. It's not that they're not thankful. They're so thankful and grateful and thankful for their donor and donor family for saving their life. But at the same time, donor families want to hear from you. That is one of the biggest, most important calls I get, that they want to hear something. Anything is better than nothing. I know you might be at a loss for words and you think that thank you is not enough, but let me tell you, a donor family would not agree. They would love to just hear anything from you. A thank you, I'm doing well, a little bit about yourself. You don't, like Dina said, you don't have to write a lot. Just a thinking of you or thank you card would be wonderful. I know, I can't imagine how hard it would be not knowing what to say. This is such a huge gift of life, but I can tell you that every donor family I've talked to has told me that anything is better than nothing. They just want to hear that their loved one made a difference and hear from someone whose life has been changed and saved by their loved one.
Great point, Lydia. That's exactly right. Thank you for
Thank
adding.
you, Lydia. Perfect. Yeah.
So let's talk about the roads of communication again. We talked about how the process, where we have to go from the family to LifeLink to the transplant center, then to the recipient, and vice versa. So it can be really long. Lydia, let's expand on it a little bit and talk about how long that process can really take from the time a donor family or transplant recipient sends their letter and what happens. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So like the graphic showed, there are a lot of mailings involved. Like Dina said, the process does work, but unfortunately there's kind of a lot of back and forth. So LifeLink, as well as the transplant centers and some tissue partners, we do our very best in mailing the correspondence in a timely manner. But because donor families or recipients can initiate that correspondence in organ donation, that is, it is possible for the letters to kind of cross in the mail, or a letter might be on my desk or a letter might be on a transplant center's desk. So once in a while, those letters kind of cross in the mail. And so a family might get a letter where they don't understand why the recipient, didn't answer their questions, or vice versa, why the donor family didn't write back. And it kind of seems like, wait a minute, they didn't get my letter yet. That's just because of the time frame. I mean, we do the best we can to get these letters as soon as I get them, to get them out to the transplant center, but then it might sit on the transplant center's desk for a little bit. Sometimes they send it to the recipient directly. Sometimes they wait until the recipient comes in and is seen at their next clinic visit. So all transplant centers are different. Dina and I do the best we can as soon as they come into our, into our office. So like I said, we do the best we can, but if there is ever a slight delay or the mail kind of crosses in the mail and it looks like the person didn't receive your letter, they probably didn't. Maybe they sent their letter and they got your letter after the fact, and vice versa. So, but to answer your question, Dina and I do the best we can, and all we can control is here. What we do at LifeLink is to get those letters out, whether it's to the donor family or to the recipient. But the transplant center, we also have to keep in mind that they are seeing patients. So that's not all they do. They don't just pass letters on. They are, in clinics, and they're, the appointments. And so they do the best they can at getting these letters out, either out the door in the mail to the recipient or given to the recipient at their next clinic visit. So we just have to keep that in mind.
Very good point, that this is not their only responsibility is to pass letters back and forth. That's perfect, because they are seeing patients and they're doing other things. And while it is important, it's a priority for them, and it's not, sometimes on this day might not be the top priority. So good information, and the whole conversation of it could be on the road at the same time. So it might get crossed at some point. A letter to a family or to a recipient might pass, and you might not, you'll wonder, why didn't they mention this when I in my letter? Because they might have not have gotten it yet. So that's good to remember. Yeah. So let's talk about a time frame or a time limit. Is there a time frame that we need to wait to write our letters, or can we write right after donation or right after transplant? How does that work?
LifeLink does not have a time limit. We've had donor families write right away, recipients write right away. We don't hold anything up. As soon as we get that letter, we're going to pass it on. Now, some transplant centers, and they're constantly changing. The rules are kind of changing. But some transplant centers have a rule of 1 year that they're going to wait. They're going to tell their recipient, please wait. Let's let the family do some healing. You need to do some healing from your surgery. Let's go ahead and wait about a year before you reach out. Like I said, we don't have that rule. So I'm not gonna hold a letter from a recipient. As soon as I get it, I'm gonna send it to the donor family. And same, if I get a letter from a donor family, I'm gonna pass that on. We don't have that rule. But that could be another reason. If you're a donor family and you haven't heard from a recipient and it's within that first year, that could be a reason why you may not have heard yet. It could be many reasons. It could be survivor's guilt. They don't know what to say, so they don't say anything at all. But as far as timing, we don't have that rule, but some transplant centers do. So that could be part of the reason you're not hearing something.
So for our transplant recipients, if you are wondering about writing and you want to write a letter, but you don't know if you can, write that letter and then talk to your transplant center and just make sure they're okay with sending it and give it to them, and they'll forward it on if it's okay. And they'll let you know if they have that time frame. Again, as Lydia said, it's different from everybody. So we can't say this transplant center does it this way and this one does it that way. Constantly changing. So if you have questions as a recipient, ask your transplant coordinator at your transplant center, and they'll be able to give you the most accurate information that's current right now. So
exactly.
Good stuff.
Yep.
So we started the correspondence. We've written a letter. The donor family has written a letter. The recipient sent a card. We're on the road to communication. So now what? When should we hear back? And what if we don't hear back? Let's talk about that, Dina. Can you share some information about that?
Yeah. So based on what you just said, so one reason you may not hear back is the transplant center does not allow that correspondence for up to a year. That could be one reason, but there's so many different reasons. There is no guarantee that you will hear back from the recipient and or the family. And I want to just say there's no right or no wrong. It is an individual choice, and each individual, each recipient, each family has to do what feels right for them and what they are comfortable with. So I want to say that if you hear from your family or you hear from your recipient and you never hear back, I think like Lydia said earlier, it doesn't mean that they don't appreciate your correspondence. They are just not at a place to reciprocate that correspondence. I think I mentioned earlier, our families have experienced traumatic and painful loss, and sometimes it is just too painful for them to correspond right away. They may be ready 3 years from now. With recipients, their recovery may have been a little more difficult than they were anticipating. They could be, as we've mentioned, have survivor's guilt. Just don't lose heart that they are not hearing or getting your words. They're still thankful on both ends to hear from you. They are just at a different place, and that can be very hard to explain to a family or explain to a recipient. We have several families and recipients that will write to each other on the 1-year anniversary. That's common. But just know that you need to do what's best for you, and where you're at in your grief process. And I know Tracy has a personal story that she would like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you said it. I'm picking up what you're saying things, and as you say it like clicks in my mind. That was just the perfect way to say it. Of everybody's different. Everybody's on a different journey. So even though these families have lost someone like someone else, their journey is still different because it's a different person. So it's a difficult journey, no matter what and who you are, what side you're on. And the first difficult step is beginning that correspondence, and then the second whole piece of this is waiting to hear back or not hearing back, and then that wondering of why am I not hearing back. So I hope what the ladies have shared so far helps you kind of understand why you might not be hearing back if you don't. I will share that my mom is a 2-time heart, 1-time kidney recipient, and she got her first transplant in 2002, her first heart transplant, and she thanked her donor family pretty soon after that first transplant. It was a hard note to write. She attempted it several times before she felt like she got it right enough to send. She didn't hear back immediately. And that was something that was kind of a struggle of why are we not hearing back, that question that everybody probably has. We did get a letter back that told us more about her donor, who was a 28-year-old male named Ty. And he was an artist, a son, a brother, a father. So mom kept writing after those letters. She kept writing back. Anytime there was a big milestone in her life, she would just send a little card, send a little note. We didn't hear anything back, but she still kept sending those letters because that's what she felt like she needed to do. Again, everybody is different. You might want to write one time and that's it. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong in this whole situation. But she kept writing for the next 5 years. And even though we didn't hear back, we finally got a phone call from LifeLink that said the family was ready to meet her. And so they were ready to connect at that point. It just took them that time to get there. Again, everybody's different. They were not ready in the beginning, but then they became ready. So what I would encourage our recipients and our donor families, don't give up. If you want to keep writing, keep doing it. You never know when the other party will be ready. So if you feel the need that you want to keep writing, do it. Don't get discouraged. Keep that communication going because you never know if they want to meet, and they might not want to, and that's fine too. The second experience with us is mom received a second heart and a kidney in 2012, and she is written to that donor family, and we have not heard back. So we've seen both sides of it, one that the family communicated back and one that did not. Again, each case is different. We don't hold any ill feelings toward either family for not being ready to communicate in their time frame. So I think that's what we need to understand is every family is different, and we've got to be compassionate, understand what they're going through. And as recipients too, what you're going through, because it's a journey in itself for what you've dealt with as well. So that's that. So I kind of mentioned a little bit about meeting family. So let's talk about that. Can we meet our donor family or a recipient? Lydia, what's that look like?
Absolutely. That is an absolute possibility. If both parties are on the same page, the donor family and the recipient, we do ask the whole process needs to start by writing. So we need each party, the donor family and the recipient, would need to write at least 1 or 2 letters each, getting to know each other, like we talked about, hobbies, interests, asking, how the other one is doing, finding out about the donor, getting fairly close in writing first, and that helps build that relationship. And then if both parties are on the same page, we do ask that they put in writing, I would love to have direct contact with you, or I would love to meet you someday. I usually suggest doing both because your donor family or recipient might live in California and you're in Florida or Georgia. So a meeting might not be possible. Of course, you might want to meet someday, and that could possibly happen, but direct contact is usually could be easier than a meeting if that person is far. We ask that you put that in writing. Not only does that show us here at LifeLink, it's going to show the donor family and or recipient. It's going to show the transplant center. These instances, it's on a case-by-case basis. Dina and I write proposals. They go all the way up to our vice president. She likes to see in writing that everybody's on the same page. So we do ask that you put that in writing. If you have any questions, you can call us. I get many calls on, what should I say? What should I not say? If like I was saying earlier, if you put your last name or phone number or email address, even though we're going to go ahead and take that out, that still shows that you want to share it. That's going to show, my vice president. It's going to show the transplant center. It's showing the person you're sending it to that you want to share that. So that's the first step. And then once we find out if everybody is on the same page and people write that, then Dina and I would then send release forms to both parties. And it's just a simple 1-page form. You would fill out the top portion with your name, address, phone number, email address, whatever you're willing to share. And you would do that in the presence of a notary. We send you a self-addressed stamped envelope. You're going to send it right back to us. We make the process as easy as possible. And then once, like I said, then we do a proposal. It goes to our vice presidents, our respective vice presidents. And once they approve it, then it's at that point that we would be able to share direct contact with the other or host a meeting. Before the pandemic, both Dina and I hosted meetings. But right now we're only putting people in direct contact. But of course, they could meet on their own if they want to. And I have put people in direct contact this past year and they have met.
That's great.
So yeah, it's exciting. That's my favorite part of what we do. So it's very emotional on all levels and for all parties. But it sure is wonderful.
That's a great segue into what we're going to look at next. So I will say I mentioned it briefly, we met my mom's first donor family 5 years after. I was able to meet his parents and his daughter. And since then, I've met siblings and still keep in touch. It's a neat connection. It's a small world. We actually figured out my grandfather went to school with Ty's parents, which was just a crazy coincidence. We found that out at the meeting. So small world. For our family and Ty's family, it felt like the right thing to do at that time to meet. But remember, it might not be right for everyone. So we need to keep that in mind. Everybody's different. So donor family recipient meetings are always so special for the parties involved and even us as the LifeLink staff. I know you ladies have been a part of some. I've been able to witness some, and it's always so cool to watch these two families blend together. So we don't have a donor family recipient that's going to share with us, but we have a collage of different pictures we're going to show you. So we're going to show a little 1-minute video of our recipient and donor family meetings that we just kind of put together for you. So let's watch that video, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more and answer some questions. Every time, y'all, I saw those pictures, I knew what was coming, and I'm still like wiping my eyes.
Yep.
Like, so powerful and so emotional. And those families, you could see some of the families, they had a stethoscope and they were listening. That was a donor family listening to a heart recipient. So listening to their loved one's heart beat in someone else just gives me chills, and seeing those videos and those pictures.
Yeah.
That's great.
And can I share something, Tracy?
Absolutely, go for it.
So I wanted to share, if you never get the opportunity to meet your family or your recipient, the letters that I have received make me cry at my desk many days.
Yes.
They are beautiful, and people just pour their hearts out. And even if it's just a card with a few words, that's someone pouring their hearts out. So that's even meaningful as well. So don't get discouraged if you never get to meet them. The letters are amazing, and I just I'm so honored to be able to read those and forward those to the recipient and the family. I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. I think that's perfect, Dina. So we've had a lot of questions come in. Those are all the topics we were going to talk about. So we want to take some of your questions. So keep putting those in the comments. We're going to get to some of those, and we'll throw them up on the screen, and we'll try to answer them to the best we can. We might not get to all of them, but we have one right here. What type of info can the recipient have from the donor family? I'm 3 months out, a full liver. Congratulations. And I wanted to know what to expect. I live in PA, close to Philadelphia. Ladies, one of you want to take this question of what can they have as a recipient? What information can they have from the donor family?
That depends on the transplant center. Some transplant centers will give like the age and sex of their donor. I know for our donor families, we send what's called the family letter, and we give very general information on their loved one's organ recipients, such as age, sex, and where they were transplanted. Vanessa, I think you'll need to check with your transplant center because unfortunately, we're not able to give any information about your donor unless you wanted to reach out to your donor family. That's what correspondence is all about. So you could write to your donor family and ask them those questions, and hopefully they would write back. But your transplant center may give you very limited information as far as age and sex and possibly where your donor is from.
And all that goes back to the confidentiality and the privacy that we have for both parties, and it's to protect both parties, the recipient and the donor family. So,
And we get questions from donor families asking for more specific information on the recipients. So it works both ways. And we're not able to give specific information on the recipients. So that's why we suggest that they write. We suggest the donor families write to the recipients, and hopefully they'll write back and give them more information about themselves. And hope if the recipient wants more information about their donor or donor family, we ask them to write to their donor family, and hopefully they would write back and give more information. So that's one of the main purposes of correspondence.
thank you, Lydia. Great question, Vanessa. Thank you for putting that out there. Let's see, we have another one. Is there ever a statute of limitations where we can find out info on our donors if they don't ever write back? Who wants to, anybody want to take that
Unfortunately
one?
not. I get that question a lot as well. You know, it may be years down the road. And unfortunately, we're never able to give, the name of the donor, any information. If that donor family is not going to write to you and give you that information, and if that's not something your transplant center can give you, like I said, we're able to give very general information about the recipient. So if the transplant center is able to tell you every transplant center and hospital is different. I know some recipients get quite a bit of information about their donor. They know their age, their sex. But unfortunately, as far as the statute of limitations, no, we're never able to provide that down the road, and I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Lydia. I got another one. So when sending a thank you letter, can we put our information on a separate sheet of paper?
Now, are you referring to a separate sheet of information that would be shared with the family, or?
Ooh, that's
I understand the question.
So if you could put that in the comments, kind of clarify your question for us, and we'll come back to it. If you could clarify.
Or we could answer it both ways.
Yeah.
So or answer both ways. Yeah.
So definitely they need to, and I tell my donor families this, you always send on a separate sheet of paper, whether it's just a pad of paper like this or a full sheet of paper. On a separate sheet of paper, we need, this is for donor families, that is, your information, your loved one's name, the date they passed away, and who you're writing to. If you're writing to all the recipients, or if you're writing to just the liver recipient or just the heart recipient, if there's multiple recipients. But then I've also had, and that obviously, that piece of paper is not going to go on. We're not going to share that due to the whole privacy issues. But if you do want to share, I've also had people write on a separate sheet of paper, this is my contact information. I would like to share that information with my loved one's recipients, or the recipient could write that. Once again, we're not going to pass that on, but we will keep that on file, or we could white certain parts out. And so let's just say you're saying, this is my full name, this is my email address, this is my phone number. We're going to go ahead and white that out and not send it, but that is showing that you want to share it. So I hope that answers the question kind of both ways.
She commented that's what she meant. So that's perfect.
Okay.
Good answer. Yeah. Thank you for answering that. Is it appropriate to send a picture to the recipient from the donor, or is that something you wait to further speaking? From Jennifer.
Yeah, it is perfectly fine to share a picture. I've received a lot of correspondence with families sharing the pictures. Of course, there's no names written on the back of the picture, but that is perfectly appropriate, and even kind of deepens that connection. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Great question. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. Great question.
I like to suggest that people share pictures if they're willing, without identifying information, like Dina said. But donor families want to see a picture of the life their loved one saved, and recipients would love to see a picture of the person who saved their life. So it's a great idea, and I've never had any complaints of people saying they didn't want a picture. So we encourage that, as long as there's no identifying information.
Good to know. Great question, Jennifer. I got another one. How do we change an address on file with LifeLink because of a recent move?
That's another great question, and we wish all our families would let us know when they move. Please contact Lydia or I with your correct address, and we will make sure it gets changed in our system so we can contact you in the future as needed. That's a great question.
Good question.
Yes,
and on the bottom.
You can call us, you can email us, you can contact us on our website.
So many different ways. We are reachable. You can find us anytime. There we go. Another question. Will we be told if our donor family has no contact information on file?
Yes, if we lose contact with a donor family, we would let the transplant center know that unfortunately we've lost contact with the donor family, or like Dina said, if they're not willing to receive correspondence, we would let the transplant center know that, they would in turn tell you.
Good question.
Yes.
Just a quick thank you, ladies, for your encouraging words. How do I get a letter out to my donor family? Back in the day, we'd bring it to our coordinator. Now, what do you do, especially in these times that we're not physically going into the centers possibly? So how would they get a letter to their donor family?
We ask that they still send it to their transplant center. So they would still need to contact their transplant center or the transplant center coordinator, even if they're not being seen, because the transplant center is going to fill out a cover sheet for Dina and I with information that the recipient's not going to have, because the transplant center will know who the donor is and puts some more information on there that Dina and I need to make sure that this recipient goes with this donor family and that we're forwarding that letter on to the right donor family. So unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, or most times, it's not best for recipients to send their letter directly to us, because we don't have certain information that the transplant center has, if that makes sense, and vice versa. That's why we don't send letters directly from the donor family to a recipient. We don't even, once in a blue moon, I might have a recipient's information if they've contacted me directly, but we still need to follow that graphic. We still need to follow the rules, and we still need to send the letter to the transplant center, who's going to send it to the transplant recipient, and vice versa. So Evelyn, yes, you would send it to your transplant center, who would then send it to us, and we would then forward it on to the donor family.
Perfect. Ashley says, I received one letter of recipient from one of my husband's organs. I was just wondering how I could get an entire list of any donations that were received so I know where to begin.
So you can contact one of us, and we will be able to help you determine all the donations. And yeah, we could definitely get you started and
we would
walk through that with you.
Yes.
So again, the phone number is going on the bottom of the screen. So if you're in Georgia, the phone number there, Florida. So Lydia is our family service liaison for Florida, and Dina is for Georgia. So just call whichever service area you're in, and they'll get you started and they'll help you with that. Great question. Any more questions? Y'all type them in the comments. I'll give you a few minutes to do that while we talk about some things that are coming up. We are doing some more live with LifeLinks. Our next one is going to be on Thursday, April 22nd, and it's the Journey to Pediatric Donation. So that's going to be a great one. It's during National Pediatric Transplant Week, and it's always the last full week of Donate Life Month. Focuses on the powerful message of ending the pediatric transplant waiting list. So we've got a live panel discussion with one of our CHOA hospital development liaisons from LifeLink, a pediatric transplant recipient, and a pediatric donor mom. So please join us for that. It'll be a great panel discussion. It's going to be streamed live again on our Facebook and YouTube for Florida and Georgia. You can find out more information on our social media platforms or on our website at lifelinkfoundation.org. So we'll give you a few more seconds. We have another question. There we go, Frank. What about Fort Myers? It is an office for Tampa, but not a transplant center. Should I mail it to you, Lydia? Thank you. So Frank is a recipient, so he needs to mail his letter to the transplant center.
Right.
Correct?
And I know Frank. Hi, Frank. And I know his transplant was a while back. So that's true. We can take certain letters on a case-by-case basis. I do know that there is TGH has kind of taken over the transplant center in Fort Myers, Frank. If you could check with them to see if they can forward on your letter. But obviously, Dina and I have taken letters directly from recipients on a case-by-case basis. If we're able to, just give us a call first. And if we're able to find your donor family by the information you guys can provide to us, and if you're not able to send it to a transplant center for a specific reason, like Frank is mentioning, then obviously we could take it directly from you. We're not going to give you nowhere to send your letter. So obviously we want to forward that on for you. So just give us a call. It's a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, it needs to go through a transplant center. But like you said, Frank, if you're not seen at a transplant center anymore, or your transplant center has closed, give us a call and we will try to look up your donor information by your name, your transplant date, the organ you received. We'll try to look that up. And as long as we can find the right donor family and make sure we're sending your letter on to the right person, then we'll tell you to go ahead and send your letter to us.
Good answer. So Vanessa says, so I would let my coordinator know I'm interested in reaching out to my donor family, and my coordinator will let LifeLink know to get the ball rolling.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you're speaking of correspondence, so you would, I'm sure the center would encourage you to write a letter, and then they would send it to the LifeLink office, and then we would forward it to the donor family.
Exactly. That's the way to get the ball rolling. If you're ready to reach out and thank your donor family, and it's okay with your transplant center and your coordinator, as long as they don't have that rule. So you just check with them and you can get the ball rolling on your own and write that letter, give it to the transplant center, and they'll send it to us.
Perfect. Again, if we have been told to send the letters directly to LifeLink by the organ procurement agency, is that okay? My transplant team had me send my letters to that state's OPO. That agency contacted me and said to send them to you.
See, this is where it gets a little tricky, and this is why we always ask that you go through your transplant center, because that's true. You bring up a good point there. You might have received your organ in one of our donor service areas, either in Georgia or the West Central Florida area, but that might not have been from one of our donor families. Your organ may have come from a different OPO. So that brings up a good point. This is why you always need to go, well, 99% of the time, you should go through your through your transplant center, because they know where that letter needs to go. And it might not be to Dina and I, it might be, South Carolina or Texas or a different OPO where your donor family resides. So, or where your donor was from. So I'm surprised they told you to contact LifeLink directly, but I would have to send you back to your transplant center, because they are the only ones who know where your letter should go, whether it's one of us or a different OPO. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you for all that you do. Do you keep a copy of letters to the donors?
Yes, we keep a copy of all our correspondence. So if for some reason it were to get lost in the mail, lost in the hands, we have a copy of that, and it will still get to the recipient or the donor family.
Exactly. Or I've had people contact me and say they moved, or there was a fire or a flood, or something terrible happened and they lost the letters, or they were damaged. So they're not going to look the same. If you got a beautiful card or a handwritten letter, it won't look the same. It'll be a photocopy. But yes, the good news is we do keep copies of those.
Great. Vanessa asks, perfect, thank you. Also, how have you seen this play out with Zoom meetings? So I'm guessing, Vanessa, that's talking about communicating or meeting families and recipients during this pandemic time when we're not doing it in person, I think is the way she's asking that.
I personally haven't set up any Zoom meetings. I've just put families in direct contact, but I do know, I'm not sure about Zoom, but they have talked on FaceTime. So they're kind of meeting that way until it's safe to do so. Dina, have you had any experience with Zoom meetings?
I have not had experience with Zoom meetings, but there has been interest that we are exploring, just trying to work out some of the logistics, just a way for people to still meet. They can't meet physically yet, but nothing has been determined as of now.
Great. Great questions. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on and watching with us today. If you have more questions, please send them to us. You can call us. These ladies, again, are available to answer your questions at any time. Please do that. Thank you all for the wonderful comments y'all been saying. We enjoyed bringing this information to you. We hope you learned something good. Dina, Lydia, thank you so much for the valuable information. Great information for everybody on this, they're viewing this today, and even those that are going to view it later on. So thank you for that. To our viewers, thank you for joining us and giving up your hour lunch break to hang out with us for today.
Yeah.
Very appreciative of that. We hope you got that great information. And don't forget that you have the power to save lives by being an organ, eye, and tissue donor. register your decision by visiting our web screen, but take it a step further after you register your decision and tell your family and friends. Make sure they know that you want to save lives and encourage them to save lives too. So thank you again for joining us. Happy Donate Life Month, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, everyone.